when I graduated, there's kind of this drive to like have control of my own destiny, so to speak. And so that led me into the online marketing world, and kind of made me really gravitate towards online business and this sort of wild west that was there. And so that process of like taking something that was a negative and sort of spinning it to a positive was my first interaction with sort of copywriting, even though at the time I didn't know that's what it was called.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, we were talking in the beginning about your background. Maybe let's start with, some of the struggles you faced in your life, and then how, it led you to copywriting, sort of like a little bit of your backstory and where you're at with copywriting right now.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the big things when I was approaching coming into a new career, the big thing I wanted to avoid was having like my career fate in someone else's hands other than my own. I watched my dad through most of his career kind of get screwed over by boss after boss, like the whole thing. And he was always like, talking about these various negative scenarios that were happening. And I kind of was always like, well, why are you putting up with that shit? Like for me, it was I just never really understood like, okay, well, why wouldn't you get into a situation where you're not at so-and-so, like, cause it'd be an ongoing saga. Like there'd be this one person at each consecutive company who would just be an asshole for like years and years. And I'd always be hearing about this. And I'd always just be thinking like, shoot, like, I don't want to be in that situation. So when I was graduate, when I was graduating college, it was like 2012. So, starting earlier on while I was at school, we had the 2009 crash, and I'm watching like all these people losing their, 30, 35-year jobs, losing their 401ks and savings and all this jazz, and just looking at that and going, man, like I do not want to go the route of being at a company where I'm under someone else's control for 30 years and then I lose my savings because people are screwing around on Wall Street, so it's just sort of like when I graduated, there's kind of this drive to like have control of my own destiny, so to speak. And so that led me into the online marketing world, and kind of made me really gravitate towards online business and this sort of wild west that was there, where you can kind of do whatever you want. And it's literally as simple as if you can find someone to pay you for something, you go and sell it to them, especially when we talk about services. And so for me, one of the first set of services I came across that made a lot of sense to me was copywriting and writing. And I'd always been naturally talented at writing. I never really thought of it as a desired career. It was just sort of, something you did in literature class. But once I kind of connected it to sales and seeing how you're utilizing written communication to sell to people, it just really caught my interest. And I knew pretty quickly, like, this is what I want to do. And I had paid my way through college doing door-to-door sales, actually. So I had an idea of the sales process. I knew that sales is a numbers game. I knew that it's a matter of, putting in the work to get in front of new leads, so you can close them and get clients. And so I took that approach into the freelance writing world, and pretty quickly was making really good money with it. And so at that point, it was like, hey, this is solving that core challenge of having, my destiny in my own hands. And so from there, it's just been kind of a matter of growth over the years and evolving. Your interests change over time. And that's the great thing about kind of building a personal brand and having your own business is it's very easy to pivot and evolve in various directions, try new things, tackle new challenges. After I kind of hit my initial income goal, I was kind of cruising for like 2 years working on a lot of the same stuff. And I wasn't really feeling stretched. I wasn't learning. I was just making good money, which is great. But at a certain point, it was like, I really want to push myself. So I started looking for, new marketing challenges that I could apply writing to. And that took the form of like building a marketing agency, and then realizing I didn't want to run a marketing agency. So building my own businesses using content marketing and stuff like that. And then that kind of all leads to today, where I do kind of a mix of, I have some side businesses that are, making money through content marketing. I have my copywriting training program, which goes through content marketing. And then I, still take on clients to do either writing or content strategy for them. So it's just, it's opened up a lot of doors, and kind of that initial drive to just, have my fate in my own hands has, it's kind of driven me to where I am today.
Cool. So you have this guide on your website, from making $15 per article to $15K per month. Do you still remember your first ever copywriting gig?
Oh yeah, for sure. So it was actually the first ever gig. A friend of mine who had an SEO agency, and I told him like, hey, I've been doing this online writing stuff. And he goes, and at the time I was like just doing like a random blog. It was before I'd really gotten into the business side of online. And he said, hey, I'm needing to rewrite some hotel room descriptions for this company. Can you help me out? And it just ended up being a one-off project. But I was going through the process of rewriting these room descriptions, and I was like kind of just doing the thing where like they'd have these rooms that the description was basically like saying, this is a shit room. Basically the existing thing was like, this is like a bare bones, like it was almost like, why would you get this room? And so I was thinking, and I was like looking at the fact that it was the lowest priced room, and I was like, well, how can we spin this into more of a positive? And I was like, it's not a shit room. It's the cheap bare bones room for people who just want to crash there for the night. They're not looking for features. They're just looking for the cheapest option to crash for the night, get up and be gone. Like that's a selling point. It's cheaper than the other rooms for when you don't need these other features. And so that process of like taking something that was a negative and sort of spinning it to a positive was my first interaction with sort of copywriting, even though at the time I didn't know that's what it was called. And it also, the connection with SEO led to me pitching an SEO agency on my first, what ended up being my first contractor writing client. And so that one little, very, very simple, very low paid gig opened up kind of my approach that led to the ongoing career. So yeah, I'll always remember that moment of like, kind of like pivoting the messaging, and just like, I loved it. Like it got me so excited, and I was like, ooh, I like this feeling, like this is kind of everything I liked about sales, but I'm not sitting in a room with someone. It's like, it's asynchronous. And I really liked that.
Oh, 100%. And then, did it sort of automatically take off and snowball from there, or not at all?
Not automatically. I mean, so what happened was I pitched the gig at that agency, and they brought me in to do like hourly SEO work, which was like, entering like basically like data entry for Web 2.0 stuff, like the Google My Business listings and stuff like that. I don't even think Google My Business was at the time, but you had all these, sites like that. And doing some like sort of like link building stuff. And I noticed like a couple weeks in, I was realizing that every week, a lot of what they did was they'd outsource all this written content to a site called Textbroker. And they'd pay, $10 an article and get just absolute terrible pieces of writing. But they didn't really need them to be good, because it was just sort of spammy, sort of gray to black hat link building from the pre-Panda and Penguin updates. And so, so basically I was looking at this writing, and they would have me kind of edit it up to be a little bit better, and they're paying me hourly to do the editing. And I And so I pitched them like on my second week. I was like, why don't I just write all this content for you? Pay me like $12, and you're basically paying the same price once you factor in the hourly for my editing it, and you're going to get a better piece of content. And for me, I'm going to make more money, So I was doing like 20 articles a week at, 12 to $15 per article. And so that was kind of my first freelance writing gig. And I was doing that for about a year. I was doing some other stuff at the time, so I wasn't really looking to work full time. So it was just kind of a part-time thing. And then a year in, I found this other SEO agency that also needed writing. And so I pitched them as well. And they were paying me even a little bit more money than that. And then I had this article that they had me start. The original company had me start submitting guest posts around the web, and trying to get stuff published. And if I got an article published in my byline, I'd link to their clients that they wanted the links to, and they would pay me for getting those links, published. And so I was doing that. And then I had a website respond to me and say, oh, we like this. We're going to publish it. You can bill us for our normal, rate of $120 per post. I think at the time they were paying me like $50 for the link. So I was getting paid more from that gig to actually write the content itself than for the link. And that kind of opened up the idea to me that I could actually get paid for the writing, not just for the link. And so that sort of started the process of finding other websites that would pay me for the writing and not the link. And that's when things started. That's when things started picking up a bit. It wasn't until about 2 years later. So I did it just really super part-time for 3 years. And then my wedding was coming up. And I was, paying for it myself. And so a lot of bills to hit. And I had kind of just factored in, with my existing gigs that I had, I was going to be able to cover it. And then my biggest client at that point, that was probably like 60% of my income, they dropped off. And so I was sitting there with 3 to 4 months to the wedding, a lot of bills still to cover, shoot, what do I do now? And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to pitch like crazy, just do the numbers game thing, see if I can, fill this gap. And within a month of just extreme pitch volume, I had landed a $4,000 website copywriting gig, a $14,000 website copywriting gig, and an ongoing blogging gig that was paying me $800 a month. And so that's when it kind of I realized, oh, this is a full-time thing. And I went full-time at that point. That's when it really started to snowball.
Yeah. Thank you for the explanation. Because I really want to double click on the hustle aspect of this, because you have the sales background, you know, it's a numbers game, you need to put in the hours. Can you just expand on that in the sense that probably it was hundreds of pitches, right?
Yeah. So there's two factors to it. There's just the willingness to go in and bat 100 times, knowing that you're only going to hit a small percentage. I think that right there filters out a lot of people who try to build their own businesses. They go in expecting to score 90%. We go through our whole lives where 90% is success. It's the A, and you can't take that mentality into sales. In sales, 5% is an A, if you hit 10%, you're crushing it, so it's one of those things where just having the right mentality to go in and you're going to put up a ton of volume before you score, and that there's no way to predict exactly where the score will come from. So you just have to go in and planning to miss a bunch, knowing that predictably with enough volume, you'll get some wins. So that's number one. The second bit though is you have to be willing to adjust on the fly. So this is a big thing that I see that's a problem with a lot of my students. It takes a lot to get past that first volume first mentality. But then once you get into it, sometimes the first plan of attack that you bring in, even with volume, doesn't work out. And then the question becomes, what do you do? Do you give up, or do you adjust? And so for me, like during that month, like the first 2 weeks, I was just sending like headline pitches and stuff, like, hey, like I want to write for your blog, like, or whatever, like here's some headlines I think would be a good fit. And I just was not hearing back from anyone. Or people who would hear back, I'd hear back from with some initial interest would then drop off, and follow throughs wouldn't get them back to me. So I just got super frustrated, and I started writing whole articles. So I had 1 week where I wrote like 10 full articles, not knowing if I'd get $1 from any of them, and started sending out the full pieces. And one of those pieces is what that, some of those initial, those projects came from, was just going in and sending out full pieces. And so it's kind of like, I think it's kind of those two factors of volume first mentality, but then also, doing what it takes to figure out what's going to get the win, So I think, yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to. And you have to really believe it's going to work in the end, because you're pre putting in a lot of work, you're sort of, it's like a reverse tab, you're paying a bunch before they're actually delivering the drinks. And so it's kind of like, you have to be willing to do that. And you have to sort of have a little bit of audacity and I think faith in yourself that you're going to pull it off, but also just kind of, you have to trust the process that this is how sales works.
And you're actually working, or you have worked on spec before. So that's actually working for free, right? Hoping that they'll accept the article.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, it's not all wasted in the sense of, if you write a full article and pitch it to one client and they don't take it, you can always retool it and pitch it to someone else, So you are, in some ways, you're creating sellable assets that you can then fine tune, So it's not necessarily that it's all going to go to waste, but it's definitely that willingness to, put work in before you're actually getting paid for it. Because I mean, it's easy to put work in when you're already getting paid, that's a lot easier to do. And so when you're going in, and honestly, when you're in the first year of anything, whether it's freelance writing or any other business, that initial traction is a lot harder than it's, that first year is going to be harder than any consecutive year. Like for me, like it's pretty easy for me to land clients now that I've been doing this almost 10 years. And I have a lot of contacts in the industry now. There's a lot of, proof that I can show people, when I want to go land a new client. So it's real easy to land a client now, but that first year, it's an uphill battle. And a lot of people don't make it through that,
Yeah. And it's like, it's all about that proof that you can do it. But in the beginning, you don't have it, right? So,
yep.
And then I feel like, because I've certainly been in this position myself, and then, like you're making, excuses like, but I don't want to work for free. And like, I don't want to put in all this time. It's like, but like, do you actually want it or not? Because, it's up to you. Right. And then it comes down to faith, for sure. Let's maybe talk a bit about your writing process, because I know you're super prolific and you're like, I don't even know. It seems like you're writing like a zillion words a day. How do you do it? Because there must be
not quite.
Some like magic sauce or something. What's your secret sauce?
I'm actually a super slow writer. It takes me a while. I don't have a particularly fast process. And over the last year, especially, I've been very unproductive with 2 kids and a pandemic. But what I have done is I've been consistent. And that's just kind of, over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time writing, and that adds up, and that's the thing. When you're doing writing that you're publishing for clients under your own name, that you're publishing on your own blog, stuff that's visible, like when people show up and find your brand, they're not just finding what you've done in the last month, they're finding, 10 years worth of stuff. So it's sort of like, that's what I love about writing in terms of how it factors into personal branding is you're building this growing asset around your brand that, provides value to you ongoing for years.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
but I mean,
but
so
I'm going to give you some,
I was
going to say, yeah.
to dive into my process, I will tell, okay. So that said, the process itself, I basically like to put together an outline about the top. I identify the topic first. Here's what I want to say. And on that note, I'll try not to get too high up on this horse, but like distribution first is the way I pick my topics. And it's one of the biggest issues I see with a lot of people. So many people who are trying to get into writing, they just write what they want to write and then look to promote it or look to get it in front of people. And it just doesn't work that way unless you're just a really unique talent or a uniquely interesting person that would almost accumulate a huge brand following no matter what you did. You can't just write and expect people to come want to read what you wrote about. It doesn't work that way. You have to write for the distribution. So for me, when I'm writing, obviously if I'm writing for a client, it's based on their distribution. If I'm writing for my own blog, my distribution is SEO. So I'm looking at what are topics that people are searching for, what are their topics that people are wanting to learn about connected to writing and freelancing. And then I'll write, and then I'll plan out a resource that I feel will be uniquely helpful for those questions. And for me, it's all about making the best resource online. So I'll look through all the existing content, the stuff that's ranking on the front page, the stuff that's getting shared a lot. And I'll look and see, what are the best pieces of all this content and how can I create something that's even more comprehensive, more granular, addresses questions that are being overlooked, provides, unique data that others aren't covering, stuff like that, anything where I can make it better. And then I outline that, I strategize, I list that out, what I want to dive into, all the different pieces. And then I'll write, usually my first draft, I spend a lot of time playing around with it and rewriting. So I tend to be a single draft writer in the sense that I sort of edit sections as I go and retool sections as I go. That said, there have been times in the past where I've been really slow that way. So I'll just power through a first draft and use the second draft to really make it great. So I've had success with both processes. But for the most part, I just go through and, look for ways as I'm writing. Writing is a learning process. So as I'm writing, I'm looking for ways, I'm looking for opportunities to make it special, even beyond what I anticipated during the outline. So a lot of times, midway through a piece, I'll have an idea for how I can make the piece even better. And I'll take the time to go do that. I can't always do that with my clients in the sense that, I have a fixed budget for a given piece of content. So, there's not really, I can't really afford to go spend an extra 10 hours exploring a new idea. But for my own content on my own websites, I'll give myself the time to do that. And then again, it's just kind of one of those things where, if I have 5 different pieces of content that are each 5,000 words, that's going to feel more prolific to readers than if I had like 25 pieces at, 1,000 words each. Because those 1,000-word pieces just don't have the same impact on people. A lot of them just get overlooked, whereas these really big, these bigger pieces make more of an impact. So when you have that impact more frequently, it gives that feeling of like, wow, this guy's everywhere. He's really prolific. Like, how do you do all this content? When in reality, I'm not a fast writer, and there's a lot of other people who churn out way more content than I do. they just doesn't, again, going back to the distribution, it doesn't get in front of people, you know?
Okay. So two things I want to say to this. One, I'd be curious as far as your note-taking process, because I'm sure, you know, there's also a method to the madness. And two, I was talking to this online writer slash copywriter, Nicholas Cole, who literally, like, so this is your opinion, right? A lot of basically long form, maybe, right? You just said 5 long pieces are superior to 25 short pieces. And he would say,
If
no.
your distribution is, SEO.
Okay. Okay.
It's all about distribution.
Okay. Gotcha. Cause I was like, hang on, like, how are they? But also obviously there's multiple success, like, as in, like, there's no one single, you know, path to success. So, but this is what's worked for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'll say I don't know anyone who has SEO success these days with short form blog content. But if your distribution is like social media, if your distribution is, you know, paid advertising or sort of like community distribution, then it's just about what performs with the community. So it might be that short form performs a lot better. At the same time, though, even in social communities, usually the short form that I've seen work the most isn't taking the form of a blog post. Because if you're sharing blog posts constantly with any group, it feels spammy. Whereas if you're sharing short form on platform content, that's what gets engagement. And then if you supplement that with more sporadic but really impactful long form, that can be really powerful, because it's like anytime you're asking people to click, you're sending them into this really like excruciatingly detailed, much more in-depth piece than any of the other stuff that's being linked on that, you know, in that community or via your social account. And so it's kind of like you're just giving, you know, constant little short form value each day without asking for anything. And then when you do ask for that click, you're really blowing people away. And so I've seen it worked on social too, but at the same time, you know, it really just comes down to what's working, you know, what's working for your unique distribution channel.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that in the beginning, you should play around with the different distribution channels, long form, short form, and then basically figure out what works for you?
You can play around. I think,
like, for a beginning copywriter,
right?
Right? Like, if you have, I don't know, you just did your first, 5 gigs, right? And now you want to go like build a business.
You can play around. The thing is, if you're doing a business, that other people have already done successfully, especially like if you're doing a writing business where there's thousands of successful examples to look at, I think playing around with different stuff can be a waste of time versus just following the model that you like the best and just going all in on that from day one, giving yourself a fixed timeline to see what results you can get and then making adjustments. Because I see a lot of new people playing around with stuff forever, you know? And it's like, and there's a lot of ways that channels can feel like they're helping when it's meaningless metrics that are making you feel like you're making forward progress. So all that to say, like, definitely if you have no clue what you want to do, then yeah, trying around different channels, you know, posting on Twitter or LinkedIn and writing some blog posts and maybe leaving a little paid ads and saying, hey, which one of these do I enjoy the most? And then at that point, find someone who's crushing it on that channel and like reverse engineer their strategy and then just follow that strategy. You're going to be creating your own content, but you know, like at this stage of the game, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, you know, and your best chance of success is to find something that's worked 50 times before and just be the 51st person, you know, because we're in a global economy. Like the saturation almost doesn't exist, in the sense that the markets are so big that even if it's saturated, you can always overtake the bottom 50% of players pretty easily just because they're phoning it in, you know, like that's just kind of how it is. You know, any market that's saturated, half the players are vulnerable to being overtaken, you know, if not all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that makes sense. That makes sense. I kind of want to go back to that note-taking process.
Oh yeah. I have none. I don't take
Okay.
notes. I'm ADHD. So if I take notes, nothing happens to them. They just end up in like you know, taking notes just distracts me from what I'm doing. And I never find my way back to the notes in the first place. So like I have like a sporadic scattering of notes on my phone, Slack, an endless number of notepad app entries, you know, that like they will never be useful to me because I will never find my way back to them.
And then like, okay, so if you want to write something for your own brand or for a client, do you just sort of, do you have it all in your head and you just you start the first draft like that? Or
So basically the writing process I described, when I'm doing that initial research phase, everything I'm looking at is going straight into my outline. So like any section I find on any blog post that I think would be a good section to have in mind as well, I throw that subheader in. So I end up with this Google Doc with a bunch of headers. And then I get in there and I try to organize them around and see how can I structure something that takes the reader, that is almost like a school lesson plan. Takes the reader from you know, step A, creating a context for the points to actually be meaningful, and then working them through this whole narrative. And so I try to fit the different sections into that, and then add new ones that are needed to fill in gaps, delete ones that I feel are not optimal within the broader structure. And then as I'm going through, I just tackle it section by section. And if I need some data or I need some ideas to go into certain sections, it's just sort of some, you know, creative Googling to find what I need. You know, the nice thing with writing, when I'm writing for myself, it's on stuff that I'm knowledgeable about. When I'm writing for clients, you know, it's usually like I can get any information I need from the web, in the sense of there's not really any new industries for the most part, or at least 99% of the stuff you're working on isn't new. So you can go find content out there, and you know, it doesn't take long to learn what you need to learn, and then look for ways to apply it in a unique way, take a new angle, maybe cover it with some different content, get a little bit of unique stuff from the client to throw in, so you're not just rehashing everything else. But I don't spend a whole lot of, like, you don't want to spend too much time researching, because researching is an endless rabbit hole that you can get into that can suck up your time real quick. So
this is what I've been struggling with. Do you have any tips as far as just getting the writing out there and not being like, hey, but I need another week to finish this?
I don't personally, sort of, again, because I'm ADHD, like, for me, it's like all gas, no brakes, you know.
Yeah.
It's just sort
Okay,
of
so
like
you just like hammer it out in like 10 hours, no breaks, like
exactly. Like I'll put it out there before I've even edited the typos out. Like my typo editing happens after publication, much to the annoyance of many of my literature minded readers. So yeah, so I, like, for me just getting it out there is no issue. You just do it. It's definitely a struggle for a lot of people to put it out and not spend too much time working on it. I try for those people to help them reposition how they're viewing it to be more, a little bit more metric minded, you know, like if you're working for a client, every hour you spend, you know, circling your thumbs, like, or twiddling your thumbs, like thinking about how, you know, this isn't good enough. That's just an hour like you're just lowering your hourly rate basically for what you made on that post, you know? So it's kind of just, you have to be a little bit pragmatic with stuff. And again, it also comes down to that numbers game. Like, you have to understand that you're going to suck at first at anything you do, you know, like you improve with reps. You have to be intentional. Like you definitely need some intentionality, but like, you know, the first 100 pieces of copy I wrote were shit, you know, like there's just no two ways about it. Like anything you do, you're terrible at first and you improve with time and repetition and intentionality. And that's just how it is. So if you're not shipping, you're not really improving.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good way of thinking about it and just putting that arbitrary deadline.
And
Just
let me
like,
just say, like,
yeah.
it doesn't always pay off. Like I started a podcast last March with that mentality. Like, this isn't going to be amazing. I'm just going to put the reps in and get better as I go. And to this point, like that investment of like, you know, close, like basically a year of doing this has not really returned a huge, it hasn't really returned much of a profit. But I'm now in a much better position, you know, looking to be more intentional with what I create and make it even better and make it actually bring in an ROI. I'm in a much better position to identify what's going to work now that I've been putting reps in for a year than I was at the start. And so like I wouldn't even have had a chance to create something that's going to actually pay off without that year of reps. So even though the reps don't always, you know, pay off in and of themselves, they get you, they give you the experience that you need to really identify what will work.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. That's a good point. And it's the whole oh, I read this somewhere, this whole systems over goals. Like you make it in such a way that it's a win-win for you, because now you're a much better public speaker and you're much more comfortable, you know, talking in front of the camera or talking to people. And that in itself is a big win.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe because like I want to be cognizant of your time. So maybe I'll hit you with like just a couple of minutes of like quick fire sort of copywriting questions, just like for someone, they know copywriting is like, you know, selling online. But that's all they know. If you maybe had 5 minutes to kind of like at least give them like the bare bones basics, what would you tell them as far as like what are the biggest things to cover, maybe like the 3 or 4 like big questions to ask yourself when selling online?
Yeah. So copywriting is just communication. It's just written communication. So the first thing you need to be thinking about is, who am I speaking to? You know, who's the audience? Like if I were to tell you, hey, I want you to prepare a speech, you know, for this group of people, and it's about business. You know, I want you to have a, you know, do like a 10-minute talk about business. And in your mind, you're thinking of like a bunch of small business owners or something like that, or aspiring small business owners. So you spend a week preparing this speech, you walk in and it's a class of 5th graders, you know, like the speech you prepared is going to be completely worthless to this group of 5th graders because it's a whole different audience. And that's first and foremost with copywriting, is you need to really understand who you're speaking to, because what you're going to say to the right group should be different than what you would say to a different group. So that's first and foremost. The second thing you need to be thinking about is, what do you actually want them to do after they read this content? And it needs to be singular. Like if a piece of content is trying to get people to do, or a piece of copy is trying to get people to do multiple things, it's going to be really weak compared to a piece of copy that's just looking to get them to do one action. So anytime you're sitting down and writing, you know, like if it's for a website page, like what button do you want them to click when they read this? You know, like that, you want to be thinking about, who is this for? What do I want them to do? And that's going to, you know, those two things are going to dictate everything else about what you're writing. The second bit is focus on clarity. Just focus on like clarity in your communication. A lot of people get really hung up with the idea of persuasion, and they're always thinking about, how can I persuade someone to do this? But persuasion is like, it's like the last 5 to 10%, if that. The big thing is the big thing is clarity. And the big thing is actually having a compelling offer that's going to get people to take that action. So if you have product market fit, or if you have something that people want, and then you just communicate that clearly, you very clearly lay out what this value is, what this offer is. That's 80-90% of the way right there. And then there's, some little things you can do, 5 to 10% with persuasion, but so many people try to focus on persuasion and they just completely lose the clarity. And people are like, what are you actually trying to get me to do? So that's a big thing. And it's just, it's just communicating to people as if you were there in person. A lot of people are pretty good, like one-to-one communicators, but when you try to get them to sit down and write, they just go in this weird mode where they think they need to like formalize everything, and they just kind of lose their trail of, they lose their idea of what they're trying to do. But the best copy reads a lot like if you were to just record yourself having a conversation with someone, and then you're just sort of polishing it up a little bit. Any places where you're a little long-winded, you're making it more concise, a little bit tighter. But great copy reads like, like a pretty casual conversation between friends where you're just communicating, you're just telling them about something, and that's good copywriting in the nutshell. Tying back into the understanding who you're speaking to, the biggest reason that's important is because you need to present your message based on what they care about, not what you care about. If you have an offer that you're presenting to them, like what matters about that offer is what matters to them, not what matters to you. And a lot of business owners get real hung up on the fulfillment side of things because they're aware of all the things they're doing to deliver a superior product, or to, little challenges they've solved on the product or service side, things about themselves that they feel are really special and make them, a unique little snowflake. And the reality is your customers oftentimes don't really care about any of this stuff. They have specific benefits that they're looking for. There's specific things about what you're doing that they do care about. And so if you can sort of drop your ego a bit and think about, hey, what do they actually care about? Not what do I care about here? That's where you're going to do a much better job of delivering a message that people will respond to. And so that stuff right there, I mean, that's pretty much everything you need to write good copy. And when you're structuring a page, you want to just be aware of different things people are going to be looking for, but you don't have to reinvent that wheel. If you look up copywriting frameworks, you want to always be writing from a framework, and these are proven frameworks that have been around for years. There's hundreds of them for all sorts of situations. And they're just basically going to lay out the process you could take someone, through. So like there's the Pain-Agitate-Solution, where you're identifying a pain point, and then you sort of agitate it with your messaging. You kind of dig into what makes it so painful, and then you present the solution, and there's hundreds of ones just like that. Lots of different frameworks that you can use. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Never start from a blank page. Kind of figure out, hey, what framework makes sense for this situation? Who am I speaking to? What do I want to tell them? What do they care about? And then how can I just very clearly tell them about my offer?
Okay, nice. Last question before I'll let you tell the listeners where to find you online. How do you know which framework to go with for the situation?
So, I mean, when you're looking up frameworks, a lot of the content you can find out there will give you an idea of which ones are best for different situations. Then there's also just trial and error, and then kind of common sense, and but then also just looking at, when we talk about what I mentioned earlier about be the 51st business, not the first business. Like it's kind of like that. Like if you're coming into a space where there's a lot of people killing it, you can look at what frameworks they're using. You can look at how they're approaching what their customers are responding to. And there's a good chance that your customers will respond to the same thing. So it gives you a good starting place that you can then iterate from rather than just trying to figure out something from scratch. Because I mean, if you're a new business coming into a new market with a new product, like the odds are so stacked against you because everything's a guess. You're just coming in and you're making a best guess, and then you're having to test and spend a lot of money trial and erroring until you find, that's how all business works. Everything's an educated guess. Like you could come to me as a 10-year copywriter, show me 3 pieces of copy, ask me, hey, which one of these do I think is going to perform best? Like, if each of them are decent enough, there's a good chance I won't know. Or the one that I would pick and say, hey, I think this is the best one. If you were to actually run $1,000 worth of traffic to those 3 different ones, a different one might perform better. Like it's really, marketing is just educated guessing. And like you said, systems, not goals. Having a system for throwing something out there, evaluating how it works, and then iterating based on the data you're getting is ultimately how you succeed at any form of marketing.
Gotcha. Where can people find you online, Jacob, and anything you want to plug?
Yeah, if you head on over to jacobmcmillen.com, I have a lot of content on mostly writing and then, freelancing and marketing as well. The main thing I do there is help freelance writers build their businesses. But then there's also a lot of, marketing content as well, because I do a lot of marketing. And that's really, that's the best place to connect with me is, through my email list. Or maybe on Twitter, like we connected. I think it's jmcmillen89 is my tag. But yeah, that's my only plug there.
Fantastic. Man, this has been so great with everything, the copywriting advice, the background, the writing process. I'm so stoked to put this online. It's going to help a ton of people. Jacob, thank you a ton for doing this. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, you have a great day. Okay. Thanks so much for listening. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or Spotify, and share the episode with someone you know. It would really help me out a ton. New podcast coming out every Monday. See you next week.